your screen, you should be able to see. Well, let me say hello first. I'm Tom Rod. Hello, everybody here at the University of Charleston, and hello, everybody on the internet. Next to me is my colleague, Morgan King, who works for the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, and she's going to be my co-moderator this evening. And I'll point to a few other people as they show up on your screens. We're due to start in 5 minutes. So we'll probably wait that long because we got about 25 people here in Charleston, and I can't see how many participants we have online yet, but a number of folks have joined us online, so that's great. I think that solves the technical issues. We'll just wait around a little bit for people to join us, but I'll tell you a little bit about the program while we're waiting. Okay.
If you can move the microphone closer to you, it'd be great.
The microphone needs to be right in front of my mouth, and that's where it is. All right. All right, I'm going to speak closely to the mic, and I have a hat at home that looks. I call it my Indiana Jones hat, and I feel like I should wear it to these programs because Zoom is always a bit of an adventure. So we're on a Zoom adventure here tonight. I'm speaking to you in. The folks here know this, but I'll say it for the folks who are online. From the Irma Bird Gallery at the University of Charleston in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm the director of the West Virginia Center on Climate Change. Thanks very much for joining us online and in person at this hybrid Zoom webinar. That's a webinar where we have two different audience groups. We got the in-person group here in Charleston, and there's a whole universe of people out there who are Zooming in, and part of our congregation. I don't know if I was trying to explain to my grandson the old thing. This is the church, this is the steeple, this is the online crowd, this is the in the room crowd, and here's the open the doors and see all the people. So this is our hybrid Zoom webinar that we're having tonight. And the topic of the program is the just enacted Federal Inflation Reduction Act. And as I say, with me is the co-moderator, Morgan King. Wave, Morgan. I'll hand you the microphone in a minute. Morgan works on climate programs for the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, which is headquartered here in Charleston, works around the state on all kinds of projects related to our state's beautiful rivers and streams. And she specifically works on things related to the climate crisis. And Morgan is a highly qualified scientific professional in her own right. She has a bachelor's of science in civil engineering. She earned at West Virginia University. And she also has master's degrees in public policy and environmental systems engineering from the University College London and the University of Cambridge in England as well. Welcome, Morgan. Good to see you. I want to say a special thank you to the University of Charleston and their IT staff, especially, who are helping us do this Zoom program, and to the UC professors, Kara Fisher and Hallie Shalag. Hallie, are you going over to log on?
Well, actually, I don't need to log on, so I'm good. Do you want to wait until 7 to start? Because I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, well, I won't call on you to say anything until 7
Okay.
p.m.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to say now, but I think that if you want everyone to hear everything.
I think you probably have a good point. So we'll just sit here and wait a little bit while we see how many people are coming on. Can we get an idea of how many folks have joined us? Cool. Okay. You want to say that again?
Yeah, I see we've got several folks, more than a dozen folks online. Just keep joining and we'll get started here in a couple minutes.
So you can see the Irma Bird Gallery while we're waiting. All around the walls, I believe all of the paintings in this collection are by women artists, correct? Isn't that the deal? They sure are, yeah. Pretty wonderful collection of international art, really. Not just from West Virginia, but from a lot of different places. And Irma Bird was the wife of Robert C. Bird, correct? Our famous senator who brought all kinds of wonderful federal dollars to West Virginia. And I'm sure that UC there's several things named for birds down here. So I'm sure they're the beneficiary of a lot of that largesse, which is very nice. And UC is just a beautiful place. You got to come and visit it in person. Become a climate activist. We've done, this is the fifth of these webinars that we've done this year, and they've been pretty successful. We were sort of moved to do these webinar programs because we had been doing live climate education programs, but the COVID really slowed that down. So rather than not do them at all, like a lot of educational organizations, we went online, and we found that we could get some pretty good speakers to come online, people who we probably wouldn't be able to afford, or we couldn't get them to come to West Virginia. And so the idea behind these hybrid webinars is that we can sort of combine the best of both worlds. We can get some pretty high quality speakers to come and talk to people here in West Virginia. And we can also have live face-to-face conversations here, which is good. It's 7:01 p.m. Hallie, are you ready to say welcome everybody?
Yeah, well, I want to welcome our panelists. I know they're gonna tell you a little bit about themselves.
I just didn't know if you wanted to show everyone your neck.
What? Oh, okay. I'll lean back. I'm trying to manage both the guidance for the microphone and the guidance for the Zoom. Everyone knows I'm great at technology. Welcome to the University of Charleston. I and my partner in chaos, Dr. Kara Fisher, are co-sponsoring this event with our esteemed colleagues here. We want to say we're really excited to see a room packed with students from all sorts of different disciplines to learn about what's happening with the new legislation, think about their own personal and professional lives, and understand how climate change is important to each of us in those capacities at every level in our lives. I think everyone should be able to take away tonight at least one or two or three or even more ways that we are going to have to think about our training and our education and what we're going to have to do in our own disciplines to address climate change now, well, yesterday, today, and in the future. And it's just a real joy to have this important event as part of their training, thinking a little bit like a professor for a minute. And we really want to thank you for bringing expertise to our campus so that we can all think about these things in substantive ways. And welcome to the University of Charleston.
I'll just say to the students in the room, if you want to be recognized for your participation today, see Olivia before you leave.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think everyone's going to want to hear really wonderful questions from students from all different backgrounds tonight in the Q&A portion of our session. Thank you and welcome.
Morgan, it's your turn.
All right, thanks so much, Tom. For the folks that are just joining, I see more folks trickling in online at our hybrid webinar, in person at the University of Charleston, and on Zoom. I'm one of the moderators tonight. My name is Morgan King, and I'm here with co-moderator Tom Rod, founder of the Center for Climate Change in West Virginia. Welcome to everyone joining us here in person and online. We are so grateful for your participation in this timely event. Now I'm going to ask tonight's speakers to make sure your cameras are on, which I believe everyone's cameras are on. Our main program speaker tonight will be Christina DeConcini, the Director of Government Affairs at the World Resources Institute, where she oversees World Resource Institute legislative work and strategy on climate change and energy issues. Also speaking tonight will be John Barnette, a professor at the University of Charleston, and Perry Bryant, a founder of the West Virginia Climate Alliance. Our format will be for each speaker to make a short presentation, and then Tom will begin the moderated portion of our panel with some initial questions to get the discussion going. We do want to get as many audience questions as possible. So people in our in-person audience, you can write your questions on note cards that should be floating around. And you can also submit questions online in the Q&A box. I'll be moderating the questions online, keeping an eye out for them, as well as coming and collecting some of the note card questions so that when it's time to transition to that portion, we can share them with the speakers. So now I'll pass it over to Tom to get things going.
Okay, thank you very much, Morgan. Now, Kara, you can turn off the camera on the laptop on the podium. So, and I want to say, and Perry and John, you guys can turn off your cameras for this portion of the program.
Yeah, their sound is enough.
Okay, but be well aware that they're going to see you scratch your ears while, there you go. I want to say hello then to our main speaker tonight, who's going to kick things off, and that's Christina DeConcini. Christina, welcome. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and it's great to be here. Do you want me to start right now?
No, yeah, I want to just say a couple of words of introduction so you tell people who you are. And again, I want to say hello to everybody who just joined us online. We got 41 people in the ozone joining us now. So all you folks in the audience, wave to the camera, wave to everybody in the 41 people, as we're making a congregation here out of these two different groups of people. All right, Christina DeConcini, she earned a law degree, JD, at Northeastern University and a bachelor's in history at the University of California, San Diego. She is the director of government affairs at the World Resources Institute, where she oversees the WRI's legislative work and strategy on climate change and energy. She's a board member of the Woodwell Climate Center, which used to be called the Woods Hole Research Center, extremely prestigious scientific research center, and president of the board of the Pricing Carbon Initiative. She serves as an advisor to rural investment to protect our environment and keeping current a sea level rise challenge for Greater Miami. She was deeply involved in all of the negotiations that led to the passage of the recent Inflation Reduction Act, which is a historic piece of legislation. And we're just delighted that she's taken time to talk to us. So I'm going to turn off my camera. And Christina, we're going to feature you as our speaker. And Morgan here is going to put your slides up.
Okay, terrific, and thank you. So first of all, thanks everybody for coming to this evening. It's a real honor to be here with all of you, both online and in the auditorium there at University of Charleston. And thank you, Tom, the West Virginia Center for Climate Change, Professor Barnette, Mr. Bryant, Morgan, Kara, and everybody in the audience and anyone who I may have overlooked. So I'm going to very briefly, because they told me to do this in 10 minutes, go over just the climate provisions. And as you know, this bill has also things on healthcare and prescription drugs of this incredibly significant act. And many people have been working for decades and decades to get Congress to act on this. So here's what I'm going to cover. I'm going to do a 60-second history of the US climate policy and why maybe this finally passed. And I also am going to point out how the climate provisions in this bill really are 3 different bills that have come together that achieve climate policy goals, manufacturing, and environmental justice goals. Next slide. So what is the magic sauce? I think the magic sauce is that this is carrots and not sticks. And next slide. We have a long history, those of us who have been working on this for a long time and have sort of been like Lucy and the football, or Charlie Brown with Lucy pulling out the football, where we get close to things and it collapses. I've been working at this for about 16 years, but many people have been working at it for 30 or 40 years. So I think that, and one of the reasons I want to say, the reason why we ended up with a carrot only piece of legislation is because we couldn't get 60 votes and bipartisan support on this in the Senate. So we were left with working with a reconciliation, which requires that you only do spending and collecting money. And as you know, Senator Manchin, your senator, was the key vote that we didn't know was going to come across the finish line until the end to make this all possible. Okay, next slide. I want to tell you that if there's one thing you take away tonight, I want you to know that this bill is going to cut emissions by 1 million metric tons. So instead of talking about it the way people keep doing 369 billion investments, I prefer to call it the gigaton bill because it's going to reduce emissions really substantially. And these are a few of the topics I'm going to cover moving along, but I'm not going to belabor them right now. This is just an outline of where I'm going. Next slide, please. This is the Princeton analysis that shows that we will probably get close to 42% reductions from 2005 from the policies of this bill, as well as the ones in the infrastructure bill. So we have a pledge to beat 50 or 52% internationally. So there is a gap there, and that's going to have to be filled by some national actions with states, cities, localities, businesses. And I feel fairly favorable, pretty positive that we could get there. What I want to say is if this bill hadn't passed, there would be no way for the United States to meet its international commitments. We'd actually be going to the next conference of the parties, which is the international conference, and saying we failed. So it's quite a big deal that we have made this progress. It's not perfect. There is no piece of legislation on any topic that will do everything you want on one topic, but it's a monumental step in the right direction, and the first time the United States is really doing something significant. Okay, on the next slide, I want to touch on the other 2 parts of this bill that are really revolutionary. This is the first time the U.S. Climate policy has has invested substantially in addressing environmental justice issues. $60 billion in this bill is focused on that. It's not enough, of course, but it's 1/6 of the bill, and it's a really big deal. And what I want to say about this is that what is neat about this and the manufacturing part of this is that it's woven throughout the bill. So for every tax credit, you get far more credits if you are serving disadvantaged communities, building disadvantaged communities, all those kinds of things. So it also is going to reduce, in addition to deploying clean energy, it's going to reduce particulate pollution from fossil fuels. And this is the most important issue for frontline communities who are consistently subjected to pollution built right in their backyards. Analysis shows it will avoid up to 3,900 premature deaths a year and 100,000 asthma attacks by 2030, which is not insignificant, both in terms of health, well-being, and employment. Next slide. This one I'm just flagging. I'm going to touch on it later. There's going to be a lot of ways that all Americans will save money by in this bill. Okay, next slide. This is the manufacturing piece that I wanted to talk about. This is if you were working on like labor and trying to have a manufacturing policy in the United States, which labor has been doing for 30 years, this is an incredible accomplishment, this bill. It is actually a manufacturing bill in addition to a climate bill. And I think it's really wonderful that the manufacturing policies that we desperately need in this country and that we haven't had for a long time are attached to a climate bill. So throughout the entire bill, you're not going to get any credits unless you pay fair wages, follow all labor standards. And there's incredible additional incentives for manufacturing in the US, producing things here, et cetera. So it's really like, for instance, there's a 10% domestic manufacturing bonus on most things. There's a 10% if you are building these new clean energy in low income communities. And a point I meant to make on the environmental justice, one of the amazing things is not only do you and you must, in order to get the benefits, you must provide apprenticeships. So instead of just saying, okay, we're coming to community and we have like a lot of wind jobs. Oh, sorry, you don't know how to do wind jobs. Well, too bad. Throughout this whole bill, they built in requirements for apprenticeships so that we could train people to do the jobs of tomorrow instead of just coming in and saying, well, sorry, you don't have the skills. Next slide. Every deep decarbonization study that's been done, I have many of them listed here, Net Zero America, E3, ARENA, IEA, IPCC, they all show these are the 4 things that are going to have to be part of a net zero economy. Next slide. The IRA addresses every one of these. I'm going to focus a lot on the third one, the electricity decarbonization, because I think this is really pretty radical, as well as a little bit on the fourth one. And I know that Mr. Bryant is going to talk about energy efficiency. I'm happy to talk about any of these later. Some questions. Next slide. Now, here is where I want to slow down. This is plain old revolutionary. And this is why this bill is going to turn the US economy towards low carbon, send incredibly strong market signals, and change the trajectory by making low carbon fuel and investments and electricity cheaper than high carbon. So what we had before was in this first box here on ITC and PTC or wind, solar, and other things. They're constantly expire, years without them, then we barely pull together, and then we have it for 2 years, it falls off the cliffs. That markets can't count on that. That is not a market signal. You don't know if you're going to be able to keep investing in solar if you have no idea what the price is going to be. So it's not constant and has been really problematic. So in this new approach, first of all, what's really cool about it is it's emission-based. So it's not just, yes, it's for 10 years, but it's emission-based. So it could go much further than that if we don't achieve the carbon reductions required. So while this isn't exactly a stick, it's going to continue further than that. And that's also why I think the $369 billion could be an underestimate. In addition, it's really radical that it's going to set up an ITC and a PTC that is going to be technology neutral. So it's not just going to say just these things win. Whatever clean energy can compete is going to be there. And that is what is going to be required to solve this gigantic problem we have. It also creates a PTC for existing nuclear. The Union of Concerned Scientists has very credible evidence that if we were to lose all the nuclear power we currently have, emissions would skyrocket. So this is going to try to help stabilize that while we develop renewables and other energy sources. And it also increases the 45Q CCS tax credit substantially, so that perhaps we can have we need to get to a place where any fossil fuels that are remaining are abated and none are putting pollution into the air. So I also want to say that in all of this, it applies a 10% bonus for projects located in energy communities. West Virginia, maybe the whole state is considered an energy community. I'm not sure, but a big part of it will be. Then you get 10% bonus for domestic manufacturing requirements on steel and iron, 10% for projects located in low income or tribal lands, 20% bonus for projects located in low income, multiple housing units. So I just wanted to really pause here because I think this is what's revolutionary. And this is what, if you want to understand, like, well, how's it going to get all these emission reduction? This is how it's going to do it. But there are so many other great parts of the bill. Okay, next slide, please. So real quickly, renewables are falling like crazy. Prices are falling. They're cost competitive. They're fantastic. We're going to need to have mostly renewables powering the United States. But all of these studies, you will see that they say that they're cheapest on levelized cost basis. And it's important for 2 seconds to understand what that means, because that is why this bill and analysts don't think we should go 100% renewable. Next slide. Okay, next slide. That's a mistake. Okay. And next slide, mistake, sorry. And now we're back on track. So I want to talk about what this, all of the studies that show that renewables are cheaper at levelized cost basis. By the way, I'm stealing this analogy 100% from my good friend and colleague who gave me permission, Carl Hausger. The question is, why did the IRA take a technology neutral approach when we know renewables are the cheapest amount? And he has this great analogy. If you had your shooting guard was doing a great job, why would you not hire just 4 more? In other words, putting all of your chips on one technologies doesn't make sense, and it's not aligned with what the IPCC and all the deep decarbon analysis show that we are going to need. So it'd be kind of like just counting how many shots the guard made rather than what the score of the team was, because we have a complex electricity system with wind and solar being intermittent, and we need stable resources behind that, even though I want to underscore that renewables are going to need to be the majority of electricity going forward. Next slide, please. So this is basically levelized cost is how much for one power plant, which is just the guard, how many baskets he makes. The system is how much the whole system is going to cost. And all credible analysis from, you can see Princeton, ETC, ARENA, IEA, they all say that we're going to need to have diversification of electricity sources in order to get where we need to go. Next slide. This is just another point making the same point that while we could get maybe 80 or 90% to renewables, at some point it becomes very difficult to get around the cost curves and reliability question. And that's why we're going to need carbon removal and carbon capture. Next slide. I also wanted to say that we are not alone in this. Look at this slide. This is what other governments are planning to do. None of them are saying they're going to do all renewables. Why? Because they also are following the same models that demonstrate that we can't get to where we need to go only with that we're going to need a full plate of different things, with renewables being the largest portion. Next slide. Here is something that's incredibly important. When you hear people say, oh, we just like renewables, CCS is terrible, ... None of those people, if you say to them, well, how do you suggest we mitigate the fastest growing area of emissions in industrial emissions? And they always say, well, I don't know, that's going to be really hard. Well, yeah, it's going to be really hard. And we're not going to be able to do it with windmills alone. So this bill invests heavily in that, as well as massively in renewables energies. And this is a really great thing, because this bill overall on climate is very comprehensive. I would say the one area that it didn't come up, in my opinion, all the way to where it should have been, is public transportation investment. But let's move on to this industrial emissions. They're hard to abate, and this is what the bill does. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the IPCC and every other report shows that we're going to need to remove carbon from the atmosphere, right? So the first answer is great. Trees do that. They sure do. WRI has massive support for this. We need to do absolutely every single nature-based solution we can to sequester carbon. Fortunately, this bill has loads of money going to the U.S. Forest Service, USDA, and to farmers. Billions of dollars for farmers to do smart climate practices, which is necessary because they can't afford to just do it because it's the right thing. So this is a wonderful thing. However, every piece of analysis, the National Academy of Sciences shows that even if we do all the nature-based solutions, which we should do yesterday because they're low-hanging fruit and they're essential that we do, it is not going to, you'll see the part I highlighted below, it's not going to get close to the amount of carbon that we're going to have to remove in addition to mitigation, because we've so overshot our carbon budget. While this bill is fantastic, to be honest, we needed it 30 years ago, but it's taken the US a long time to get on board with. This is a serious problem. It's going to require serious government intervention to solve. And that's why this bill has a lot of great stuff on direct air capture, bioenergy, and CCS. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this, but the IPCC, as you can see, it shows how much carbon capture we're going to need. These are just some of the things that make this so that CCS and DAC, direct air capture, could become affordable options. Next slide. I wanted to just a flag here because I just mentioned that on the 24.9 billion to help farmers, 88 billion for equip, and a lot of funding for direct air capture. So what's good about this? The bill didn't say we're just going to do natural solutions. And the bill didn't say we're just going to invest in technological solutions. It said we're going to follow what the science says, which says that we're going to need all of this, as this is a massive problem to solve. Next slide. This sort of speaks for itself. So we could just go to the next slide. And this goes back to my point. Should we place all of our chips on just things that feel good to us, that sound good to us, or should we follow the science and invest in a broader portfolio? And fortunately, the authors of this bill all chose following science. Next slide. I'm almost finished. I hope I'm not too long, but okay, there are some of this I've talked to you about, but this bill is amazing in many ways. One is this has never, ever been done before for tax credits. There's direct pay. So a tax credit in general, as all of you know, you have to have tax equity to get it. And you have to wait until you pay your taxes to get that equity. This is remarkable in that you could just get the credit. So you don't have to have the tax equity first. It cuts out Wall Street, it cuts out the middleman, and it lets small players in on developing all of this. So it's basically, if you go forward and do this, you can just get paid for it. You don't have to have the credit. So it's quite wonderful. I've mentioned this multiple times, but I'm just the most excited about this is that there's multipliers throughout this bill for labor standards, domestic production, project siting and energy transition communities, low income, tribal. There's new manufacturing credits for pretty much everything that you could imagine. And as I mentioned earlier, they're tech neutral. So that would allow, by the way, something new that we haven't invented yet that could qualify for reducing emissions and be zero emitting to qualify as well. Okay, next slide. This is really important, especially for low-income communities. There's going to be this greenhouse gas reduction fund is called a green bank. If that had passed alone, by the way, there'd be like huge amounts of people saying, oh, we never thought we could get that. That's why this bill is so amazing. It's got 27 billion, and a huge amount of that is targeted towards low-income communities to give not loans, to give grants to folks to develop clean energy in their communities. Next slide. This is what I wanted, I know others could say more about this, but just about the savings that this is going to. The estimates are that it's going to save Americans $1,800 a year. EV credits are going to continue without a cap. There's a new EV credit for used EVs, and this is going to create 9 million jobs over the next decades. And as I said, I really appreciate that they put in that these are going to be good jobs. They're going to be jobs that pay well, that have the prevailing wage, have apprenticeships, and have benefits. And as anyone knows who has worked with low-income communities, and we saw during the pandemic, people don't want a job, they want a good job. They want a job that they could support their family on and move forward. And the United States used to sort of have an economy like that. And in the past, like 40 years, we've just sort of dissolved that. So this is a part of the bill that's not talked about as much as it should be, but it's really significant. Okay, my last slide is the next one. So there's going to be some really big issues around implementing this. So while I am very enthusiastic about it, I want to make 2 points. One is I do not think this is enough. No one thinks it's enough. We're going to need to do a lot more on climate. Not only does this not get us to our 2030 goals, it doesn't get us anywhere near 2050. Implementing something of this magnitude is going to be extremely challenging. President Biden has appointed John Podesta, who is in retirement, to come back and try to just make sure that the agencies can actually absorb this money and get it out the door quickly. And I could do an entire slide deck, which I won't, on this permitting issue. In order for us to solve climate change, we're going to need to build a lot of things. And when you build anything, whether you build your house or you build a tree house for your child, it disrupts the land. And there are massive issues on that. As everyone knows, the kind of backdoor side deal with Manchin on this didn't go through, which I personally think is good because it was going to green light a lot of fossil fuel construction without any justification. But this issue has not gone away. So we now have the laws in place, but we're going to need to be able to construct this in a timely manner to be able to succeed. And with that, my next slide is thank you very much. And I hope I didn't go too much overtime. Thanks. Tom, we can't hear you, Tom. I can't hear you anyway.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry, the microphone was turned off. I want to say thank you for getting into that so enthusiastically. You warmed to your subject. It was very clear, very inspiring, really. We're going to go to our other speakers here in just a second, but I just want to say two things. First, I want to tell all the folks out in our audience here that there are some index cards on which you can write questions if they occur to you. And we'd just love it if you would do that. And Morgan will collect those. And folks online, you can go to the Q&A section, just sort of scroll, run your cursor down underneath the picture, and you can type in questions, and Morgan's monitoring those, and she's going to pose those to the speakers. Christina, of course, I can't see the folks in the audience, but I can see that here, I mean, in the online audience, but I can see the folks here in the room. And what I see is a number of people whose futures are very much ahead of them, hopefully. College students who are making plans and thinking about opportunities and how they want to, what their options are. Are we getting through? Okay. And it seems to me that most of the stuff that you're talking about is kind of a word of opportunity. It's not just a word of trying to protect the planet and the climate and protect us from the crisis that we've been hurtling towards, and people have been trying to dial back carbon emissions in order to prevent that. But the idea is to deliver opportunities and career opportunities and vocational opportunities and opportunities to have meaningful participation in solving this problem. You got any thoughts specifically directed towards people who are thinking about their careers, whether it's in public policy or science or engineering or education?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. One is, I mean, I feel really hopeful, and if people knew me, I haven't felt hopeful about any of this for a long time because it's been so frustrating. But this is going to send extremely strong signals to the market that the United States finally is saying we are going towards low carbon. So I think if you're doing engineering, science, business, the amount of jobs that are going to be open to develop all of this clean energy on every front is going to be unbelievable. I also am not a modeler, but I will not be surprised if the emissions reductions are greater than the models show. Modeling failed completely at showing how quickly solar was going to plummet. There's no model that came close to it. And a lot of this stuff snowballs. And when we finally turn the ship in the right direction, which we've never done, we've just done little tiny things where we've said, this is where we're going. I think things could go more quickly. And in terms of policy, which is the area I know a lot about, we need you. We need your voices and we need your help, because while this is a big step in the right direction, we're nowhere near where we need to go to get to a net zero economy. So we need all of your talent and all of your thoughts. And I have 3 20-something-year-old children, and they are extremely discouraged about a lot of things in the world because they're smart, educated people. And it has been really wonderful for me, and they know what I do for a living, to be able to finally say, guess what? We landed. We're no longer in we're the biggest emitter, per capita for the longest period of time, wealthiest country. And we're just going to say, we're not going to do anything about that. We're just going to keep burning up the planet. And it just gives me great hope for all of you, the next generation, anyone in college, to keep pushing on these things. And by the way, I also want to say none of this would have happened without young people. So the Sunshine Movement, that right at the beginning of Biden's election, sat in Nancy Pelosi's office and wouldn't leave until she said she would make this a priority, because they had heard the grapevine she was going to work on this but not prioritize it. That made a really big difference. So we need people in every position on the field to do this. And I just encourage people to, whatever your interest is, whether it's science, engineering, policy, or anything else, any other creative thing, there's plenty of space here, because as you know, this is a huge problem. And I think it's going to be exciting that we're going to hear from Professor Barnette about the defense piece of this, because I'll just say one thing. The Department of Defense has been ahead of this game, guys, for years and years. Why? Because they assess risk. Whereas for some reason, we have a lot of politicians that, well, I know what the reason is, but just have their fingers in their ears until now. So that was a long answer, but I feel like there's a lot of hope for people.
Thank you. So that's a good reason. I see we got a couple questions online, Morgan. We're getting them. That's good. So let me turn to John Barnette. Hi, John. Welcome. I'll introduce you a little bit. John Barnette has a doctorate of education degree. He's a professor and he's also associate dean and the director of leadership and professional development programs here at the University of Charleston. He also has a career in leadership and military leadership, and that specifically served as the commander of the West Virginia Army National Guard in West Virginia for 15 years, where he directed the training and readiness programs of Guard units for wartime and emergency response missions, including climate emergencies. He's a scholar, he's a teacher, and he's a leader in adaptation to the energy transition and climate change. And it was interesting. Christina raised the international aspects of this new legislation, that this is now the United States stepping back into the world and engaging and sending a message that we're ready to move on climate. Thank you, John, for being here.
Thank you. I'm going to try this. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me online?
Yeah, turn your camera so we can see you a little bit. Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead.
I can't do much about the glare. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here.
If you can get closer to the microphone, I just want to make sure all the people online can hear you well. Sorry.
Now,
It's okay. Not great, but okay.
not great. Okay, I'll try to speak up.
Okay.
Again, thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm not going to focus on the bill. I think Christina and Perry do an outstanding job of that, but I want to speak a little bit about increasing awareness of the issue of climate change as it relates to national defense, and also speak to you a little bit about the leadership that's going to be needed from each of us as we move forward. I think that's an important mission. And you might ask, what's this got to do with me? And again, this effort is going to take a generation of leaders. So I'd like to speak a little bit about the skills that I think you might need. I'm going to speak from, I guess, 3 lanes that I consider my lanes that I've had experience in education and that kind of stuff in. The first is about my experience with the military. And I have a grandson who goes to the University of Charleston. He's a basketball player here. And early, we were talking and he said, "Did you play basketball?" I said, "Yes, I did. I played a couple of years, then I got drafted." And he said, "Did you get a good contract?" I said, "Yeah, I got a great contract. It lasted for 44 years. So we had a little bit difference in context, but I did spend 44 years in active and reserve service. I commanded the West Virginia Army Guard for 15 years. During that time, I was task force commander of more than 75 FEMA declared national disasters. And I know many of you are not from West Virginia, but West Virginia has 55 counties. And in my tenure, every county had at least one natural disasters. If you think about that, it's a problem that touches all of us. My first experience with natural disasters was with the Buffalo Creek incident, which was horrible. And I still have, I was, I think 22 at the time, and I still have vivid images of that drastic event. Also, near the latter part of my career, I had the opportunity to be in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina for almost 7 months in a task force commander role. And also during that Katrina experience, Hurricane Rita occurred. And that was also, I thought for a long time and said for a long time that was the worst natural disaster in our nation's history. But after I see the effects last week, I think I've changed my mind about that. From the leadership perspective, which is another lane for me, I'm really interested in crisis leadership and how communities recover and how people recover. In emotional intelligence, judgment and decision-making, complexity, and how you develop leaders. All those, I think, are vitally important to the climate related occurrences. If you would, yeah, you're on. Very good. I'll catch up with you there. Go back one. Wait, next. There you go. You were right. In leadership, we talk about things happening and we say that's the what, and then more importantly is the so what, and now what. And I'll give you a minute to look at these, but you see the direct consequences as well as the indirect. And those are all real. Those we can see, those we can measure, have measured. They're very, I think, very important or crucial to the understanding of this. But you look at the national security implications. Climate change is a direct threat to the stability of not only our country, but countries throughout the world. If you think of the drought in Syria, for instance, the availability of food and water. I think, in just John Barnette's limited opinion, I think there are going to be conflicts fought over water. And that's, where we're headed in many places. So the national security implications are real. And you see, as you peel that onion, the implications for the Department of Defense. Christina mentioned a minute ago about the DOD being a leader. Yeah, I think about that. Sometimes it's humorous, but I explained to my grandkids where M&Ms came from. And if you know that story, it was World War II and preserving chocolate that wouldn't melt. So we now see that as a national treasure, but at one time it was a vital piece. If you go to the next slide, please. These are the Department of Defense strategies, climate-informed decision-making, and that's at every level in every community. It's also for the defense of our nation. We must include climate change consideration and impacts in everything we do. In the military, we must train and equip a climate-ready force. And what I'm meaning by that is a force that's really adaptable. The Marines is adapt and overcome. That's what this battle is about as well. We have to have resilient infrastructure and facilities and installations. And again, we're losing many of our military installations due to climate change, particularly in the Navy, with seaports, et cetera. And there's a real challenge in the transition of older, outdated facilities that have to be made resilient and hardened. You all know and understand the supply chain issues that we're dealing with. And a major focus for our country needs to be that we have a safe and secure and efficient supply chain, something that guarantees uninterruption in our particular in the military for supplies, materials, munitions, chemicals, and services. Great challenge there. And then one of the skills that bleeds over and leads naturally to the leadership arena is the need for collaboration. This takes a team effort at every level to solve. If you'd next slide, please. These are some categorical buckets that the West Virginia National Guard is working on, has been working on. The first is the conversion to green technologies, attempting focusing on transitioning and broadening the sources of energy, converting the vehicle fleet, both the tactical and non-tactical vehicles, to EV. Doing that in concert with Department of Defense. Hope to have most of that done, or a lot of that done by 2035. Best practices are also very important, trying to be an early adopter of things that are proven that make it easier or speed up the transition. Not only adhering to policy and regulation, but exceeding those whenever possible. I want to shift and end up talking a little bit about the leadership perspective, if you advance the slide. Climate change, dealing with it, and I'm speaking directly to people who are going to be leading the next generation dealing with this, requires an understanding of complex adaptive theory of leadership. It's a very complex problem, and it's going to take complex solutions, and it's going to take great leadership, people who are committed, who are in it for the long haul, who not only believe, but can lead others. The military introduced a term that you see in business writings now, called, and the acronym is VOCA, and that is for an environment that's volatile, that's uncertain, that there's a great deal of complexity and ambiguity. You know, you hear people talk about you have to have a tolerance for ambiguity. Even though we know a lot, all is not yet known, and it's going to be fast changing, lots of leadership issues that are not simply management, if you will. It's going to be a really challenging time for leaders and for leadership. But my personal view is it's also a great opportunity for real leaders and leadership to emerge. There's definitely a need and a place for leadership. Final slide, if you will. It calls for strong leaders who have strong self-awareness, strong self-concept, have tremendous skills with empathy, and they're also respectful of people and things. The skills that are going to, you see some of the roles that you've got to perform, but very often it's paradoxical. You have to, again, seek balance. You have to manage change and constant disruption. And then you got to be moving forward the whole time. It's important to have sense-making skills, to be able to exercise judgment and have wisdom, to make critical decisions, again, that have long-term impacts. Sometimes they're harder right. And you've got to be able to make meaning of situations. You've got to provide the rationale for others to follow. And finally, the importance of communication can't be overstated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And, you know, it's pretty apparent to anybody who sits here and looks at me on this camera that I've been around for a while. And I've seen all sorts of things take place in my life in 1960s or something like that, when we were facing some crises in America. Also the birth of a lot of good music. So that was probably, I don't know whether it was worth it. The point is, leaders emerge in all generations, and there are leaders emerging in the folks here in this room and the folks who are attending this as well. That's the nature of crises, isn't it? And not everybody's going to be a leader, but no, not everybody would want to be. But that's the great thing about the climate situation, is that people have been emerging and they've gotten us to the point of this legislation. It's taken a while. I mean, I was talking to some people last night who got into this 40 years ago, and they've been pretty discouraged to some extent. And Christina talked about that too. I mean, How does that happen? How do leaders emerge, John? Just take a second and say it.
Sure. And one of the things that I'd say right off is that leaders are not, and leadership is not developed in a crisis. They're developed way prior to it. That it's like character is not developed in a crisis, it's revealed. And I think that it's through gaining knowledge, shaping your attitude, having good coaching and mentoring, and all the things that we know about leader development. It's a process. And I think it's important to understand that and to know that a position doesn't give you that. It's the skills that you bring with you.
Great. That's a good thought. Perry, I'm going to turn to you next. Perry's been a leader here in West Virginia for many years in all aspects of progressive change. And he earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Fairmont State University, my alma mater. He worked for many years as the chief lobbyist for the West Virginia Education Association, which is the teachers union and association, and worked here in the Capitol, advancing the cause of public education and the rights of teachers. And he also worked very hard on organizing West Virginia's support for what some people call Obamacare, but which the Affordable Care Act, which is maybe people in this room that have had some benefits from that. Certainly millions and millions of Americans have benefited from that assistance in getting medical care. More recently, he's been working on climate change issues. He's the principal author of the Citizens Guide to Climate Change in West Virginia, and he recently wrote a summary of the Inflation Reduction Act, and he was one of the folks organizing the West Virginia Climate Alliance, which had the principal purpose of trying to get Senator Manchin to vote for that bill that we're celebrating tonight. And we have to say that there was a lot of success there, not everything that everybody wanted, but we got the vote and we got it across the goal line, and I'm excited about it, obviously. And Perry is going to talk about the act and his recent analysis of it. I'll turn it over to you, Perry.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I greatly appreciate that. I do want to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. The IRA it applies to the Irish Republican Army. It also applies to individual retirement accounts. It has a lot of meetings, but today it's the climate legislation. It's the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. It's really important to understand that. Megan, Morgan. So my goal and how I judge legislation is, is it going to advance the goal of keeping global climate warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius? If we can keep it below that, that's where the climate scientists tell us we can avoid the worst impact of climate change, is keeping that global warming below 1.5. Doesn't sound like much. It's a heavy lift. It's going to take a lot of effort to be able to do that. But that's our goal. And in order to accomplish that, the United States and other countries have to reduce their emissions by 50% by 2030. And then ultimately, we got to get to net zero by 2050. But the immediate goal is at 2030. And as Christine said, prior to the IRA passing, we were on track to reach about 27% reduction, not 50%, about half of what we needed to get to. With the IRA, we're going to get to 42%. We're not all the way, but it closed that gap of where we were headed and where we need to be by about 2/3. So this is a significant piece of legislation. And if I can leave you with anything tonight, I want to leave with you how important this legislation is. It is not just the single biggest investment in clean energy that Congress has ever made. It is the largest single investment in clean energy in the world's history. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Morgan, if you could. So it has tax incentives for solar and wind and batteries and electric vehicles, which are referred to as EVs. You'll hear that a lot, but that's what it refers to as electric vehicles. Energy efficiency, and I am going to talk a good bit about energy efficiency tonight. Geothermal, I think geothermal is one of those underestimated potential solutions. It has the ability to provide steady, ongoing energy, just like coal does, but without any carbon dioxide emissions. It's a great potential, and there's a lot of money in there for research for geothermal. Hydrogen, which we could spend all night talking about, nuclear carbon capture and storage. All of those are included with tax incentives. And so what's going to be the impact for West Virginia? Well, there's a 30% tax credit for installing solar. And so I happen to have solar on my house. It's magical. It sits up there and makes energy, and I don't do anything. You know, just it works seamlessly. And then there are batteries. So if I wanted to go offline, if I wanted to be off the grid, I could install batteries, and I would get a 30% tax credit for that. That's a new tax credit. Right now, there is no tax credit for batteries. It just beginning January 1st of 2023 is the first time that there's going to be a tax credit, and that's 30% for that. There's the up to $7,500 for buying a electric vehicle. There are a lot of nuances to that. And in this summary of the IRA that I passed out, it will go through all the nuances in terms of electric vehicles. I don't imagine most of you are going to purchase an electric vehicle anytime soon. So it's there if you want to look at it. But you have to understand, transportation is the single largest source of greenhouse gases in America. So if we don't deal with changing internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, we will not be able to reduce those emissions. Single largest source of emissions in the United States. We absolutely have to move towards electric vehicles, and this tax credit is going to allow that. Even if you don't take advantage of it, if John takes advantage of it, we all benefit from that. And so it's there. It's going to spur the purchase of electric vehicles, and it's an important ingredient. One of the other things that's going to happen in West Virginia is what's called 48C. And I don't mean to be technical. 48C is part of the IRS code. It's a tax credit for clean manufacturing. So a manufacturer would get 30% tax credit for manufacturing solar panels or wind turbines or batteries for electric vehicles. There is $10 billion in the IRA for the 48C funded projects. 4 billion of that, of the 10 billion, 4 billion has to be spent in coal communities. If there's a way to diversify West Virginia's economy, it's the 48C in the IRA. This is a golden opportunity for us, particularly for Southern West Virginia, to be able to diversify their economy and to have clean manufacturing jobs, as we're going to continue to see a decline in coal employment. And making sure that the people who lose their jobs in coal employment have an opportunity to go and get a good paying union, probably a union job in a manufacturing facility that pays well. I mean, it's really important, and it's going to diversify our economy. I can only hope that manufacturers in the state of West Virginia take advantage of this once-in-a-life opportunity to really diversify our economy. Morgan? But I think probably the thing that's going to impact more West Virginians in the IRA than anything else is energy efficiency. That's because as West Virginians, we have a high percentage of home ownership, among the highest in the country. Kind of surprising, but that we do. But our housing stock is in terrible shape. It's leaky, it's inefficient, and we need to make investments in it. And the IRA does that. As a matter of fact, there are 3 energy efficient programs in the IRA to help homeowners to make their homes be more energy efficient. The first one's a tax credit. So, and I want to I want to install insulation. I purchased that insulation. Put it in my attic. It's $500. And next April, I get a tax credit. That's off the bottom. That's not a tax deduction. That's a tax credit. But I have to wait till next April to be able to get that. But that's still an important way that there is no income limitations for this. Bill Gates can qualify for this tax credit. Anybody who pays taxes can do that. But the IRA recognized that not every American is in potential that has a huge tax liability where a tax credit is going to be all that beneficial. And so they established 2 rebate programs. You don't have to wait until next April for these rebate programs. You get them at the time of purchase. So that $500 worth of insulation, I get that rebate at the time I purchase it, and makes it much more affordable and much easier. You want to go to the next slide? So both of these rebate programs are targeted to low-income individuals and moderate-income individuals. Low income in this, I have to say that I'm a son of a mathematician. I hate squishy numbers. It's a genetic default. These are squishy numbers. I hate them, but they're the only numbers out there. This will give you some idea of who's going to qualify. Do not go and say, oh, well, Perry said it's $3,400 for $34,000 for an individual. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of $34,000 for an individual, or $48,000 for a family of 4, somewhere in that neighborhood. They're going to qualify for these tax rebates. You know, whether it's a water heater, $1,750, for a heat pump, $8,000 for that. Electric stove, $840. You can see upgrading your electrical service, $4,000. Additional wiring, $2,500. This is all focused so that we can electrify our homes and move away from natural gas and to focus on electrifying our homes. And this is a really important. There's a National Academy of Science. I'm going to address for just a second, Tom. National Academy of Sciences says basically, if you want to impact the climate, we need to do 3 things. First, we have to do energy efficiency. We have to make everything more efficient. Our homes, our cars, hair dryers, lawnmowers, everything, make them more energy efficient. 2, decarbonize the grid. Move away from fossil fuels to renewable energies and battery storage. And then 3, electrify everything. Electrify our transportation through electric vehicles, electrify our cooling and heating our homes through heat pumps, electrify our cooking with electric stoves, move away from internal combustion and engines and other forms of heat like that, and use energy. And the IRA moves us significantly to be able to invest in electrification of our homes. Really important criteria. Morgan, if you'll do the next one. I will. Yeah, I've got 2 more slides and I'll be done. The moderate income, our families that make less than 63,000, a person making less than 63,000, and a family of 4 making less than 90,000, they get half of those rebates that I had on the previous slide. So instead of an $8,000 for a heat pump, they'll get $4,000 towards that heat pump. Morning. And then there is a second program. The details are in this handout that I provided. I wrote this because I could not find a good summary of the IRA anywhere that said, here, as it relates to energy and the environment, and here are the moving parts, and here are some of the details instead of who qualifies and what they qualify, particularly for electric vehicles and energy efficiency. So, I think, so the question of the day was, where do we go from here? And I think there are two really important things we need to go from here. First and foremost, we have to implement the IRA. It's going to be a heavy lift, but we need to do that. Secondly, Christina was exactly right. There are all kinds of carrots in the IRA. There are very few sticks. President Biden is going to have to develop some sticks, particularly as regulating carbon dioxide emissions from coal plants, increasing CAFE standards, that's fuel efficiency, and then methane reductions, particularly from the oil and gas industry. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, far more than carbon dioxide, but it dissipates in about 10 or 12 years, which means if we can reduce methane, we can make a significant impact on climate change very quickly. And then keep the eye on your prize. Make sure that we don't exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're already at 1.1 degrees Celsius increase in global warming. So we are dangerously close to that 1.5. We're going to have to take major steps. The International Energy Agency says it's going to be the most difficult transition in mankind's history. Most difficult transition ever. And so we need to be prepared for it. We do have the tools now with the IRA to be able to make that investment. Again, it's the largest investment in the history of mankind. So we have the opportunity to do something positive. We just need to take advantage of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Perry. Morgan, are you going to collect the cards? Gary, could you collect what cards we got? I got one. There's another one. We're going to bring those up, and Morgan is going to ask questions of our speakers based on, and I think the way we'll do it is she'll ask the question, and then you folks, including you, Christina, can sort of volunteer, say, oh, I'll start on this one. So while she's doing that, let me see if I can go on the Q&A. And oh yeah, there was a question about whether Christina's slides would be available after the event, and I think you're fine with sharing them, aren't you, Christina? Okay.
I am, and I actually sent you late today a slightly updated deck that had 2 slides that were duplicates removed from it. So just circulate that one instead of the one where I had 2 duplicates, but absolutely, that's fine.
Okay, and on the same vein, this program is being recorded, and we'll probably have it online in about a week. We have a YouTube channel, and everybody who registered for it, whether you were actually here or attended or not. And by the way, we've had like 50 people, more than 50 people in our online Zoom audience. Pretty awesome. Wave to them. Hi, Zoom people. Thanks for joining our congregation here. Anyhow, we'll send out an email to everybody, which will have a link to a recording of the event. And we can see how well we managed all the Zoom stuff. Well, we're all up in a gallery format. I can see I got the audience here. I got me. I got Perry, Christina, John, Morgan. Morgan, are you ready to ask some questions? All right, your turn.
All right. I see online there are several questions submitted, and in my hands, I've got a pile of note cards from the audience. So we've got probably more questions than we have time for
18 minutes.
in the next 18 minutes, but we're going to try to do them as many as we can. And I noticed some common themes among some of them. So I'm going to do my best to try to combine some of these questions that I think can be addressed at once. So the first few I saw had some similar themes. So we're going to start with those. The first question is, are there downsides to legislations like this? Are there downsides to the Inflation Reduction Act? If so, what are they? And someone else asked about, they understand that in developing the Inflation Reduction Act, that there is a provision that includes 60 million acres of offshore oil and gas development and 2 million acres of onshore oil and gas development as a contingency for the same amount of solar and wind development. What will be the effect of this quid pro quo? How will vulnerable communities be affected by these portions of the provisions? So we'll start with that, and whoever wants to address it is welcome to.
I'd be happy to jump in there. So, and I can provide some additional analysis of this because my organization didn't do this analysis. So there is an unfortunate provision for sure in this climate bill that doesn't belong there. And that is a commitment to increase oil and gas leases on federal lands as along with to match up with wind. So to guarantee that. So this is not a good thing, and it has no business in a climate bill. The worst impact most likely will not be on emissions. It most likely will be if they actually take up these leases on the people that live near them and the impacts. There are some different analysis. Energy Innovation did analysis that showed in terms of emissions that the US supply from the federal lands and waters is offset by supply adjustments on non-federal as well as supply adjustments in other places so that they don't expect it to be an emissions increase. Moreover, there was a GRIST article that I read that said that the federal land has been greatly picked over by oil and gas, and they're not sure how eager oil and gas will be for that. So I think from an emissions standpoint, it's kind of a nothing burger, but I don't think it's a nothing burger for anybody who offshore, it wouldn't be as important, but onshore who lives in those communities and is burdened by that. And of course, we would never support having that in the bill. But as far as compromises go in legislation, it's not as horrible as it could have been. But I want to just underscore, if they take up this leasing and it's next to you and you're a frontline community that's impacted with it, then I will say it's as horrible as it could be. So that's what I wanted to say. And Energy Innovation has some interesting analysis on how it's not going to have an impact really on emissions, but that doesn't mitigate what it would have an impact on communities that will be subjected to this if these leasings happen near them.
All right, thank you for that response, Christina. I'm just for the sake of time and to get through as many of your all's strong questions as we can, I'm going to combine a couple others that I think can fit well together. So one question is asking, what will be the environmental impact if we reach 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming or more? And what is the next step in the climate fight after implementing the Inflation Reduction Act? So those are two kind of open-ended questions, but I think there might be some intersections there. So I'll open it up to maybe Perry or Professor Barnette for either of you that might be interested in addressing it.
But just reaching the 1.5, again, we're at 1.1, so we're gonna you will see even stronger hurricanes than we currently see. We'll see more droughts. We'll see more wildfires. We'll see sea level rise. All of that is baked in. The only way we can avoid those is through negative emissions, whether it be planting trees to soak carbon dioxide out of the air, or direct air capture, where you literally capture carbon dioxide out of the air and then take it and put it in the ground. But we need those negative emission strategies to be able to mitigate the worst impacts. But just because we passed this law, even if we do a very good job of implementing it, doesn't mean things get turned around right away. We have fouled the air and the oceans. It's going to take us a long time to reverse that and get back to where we need to be. And I hate to say that, But that's an honest assessment of where we are.
I think we've reached a turning point, but we're not there yet. And so that was my pitch for leadership, because it's going to take an informed, aware, and committed society to get you where you want to go. So I think it's definitely a major turning point, but not a solution yet. But now we can focus on problems and problem sets, and we're on the way.
All right, thank you so much for that. Our next question is from online. Is this legislation and plan vulnerable to being reversed the next time political power shifts in the United States, if it does?
Yes.
Oh, I disagree. So I would say that it's there's a extremely slim possibility, but the reason why legislation is so much better than regulation, we've seen it with the last president, how regulation can just literally be torn up. It's just decided it's undone. And while this was passed on reconciliation, which is not the strongest way to pass something, I would point to the ACA, where the opposing party spent 5 years trying to do nothing but overturn it and unsuccessful. It is difficult to take away things that have already been put in motion. So it is not impossible, but I personally think it will be difficult.
And if I might add on that, it will be difficult because it doesn't contain sticks. It is almost all benefits. It's all carrots. There are very few sticks in there. There's a methane fee. There's a few other minor sticks in it. So if it were a hard regulatory approach, I think it would face a much more difficult task. That it's all carrots. It makes it makes it more difficult to repeal.
Thank you both for that response. The next question is for Professor Barnette. What can small WVARNG units or junior enlisted soldiers do to help promote change in the climate movement?
And I'll give you the simple answer first, and that is be the change you want. I think leadership is about leading by example. I'll give you not a climate related example, but in 1995, 6% of the West Virginia Army National Guard had a college degree, and we made education a priority. It now is the most educated workforce in West Virginia, with 76% of the soldiers and airmen either having a degree or being enrolled in school. The state population in general is 17%. So I think with dedicated and committed leadership and strategy, you can make a huge change inside out. So I think, again, you can be the change you believe in.
Thank you for that. All right, our next question, I'm going to combine two that have similar themes, from one online and one written down here from the in-person audience. And it's for Christina regarding potential permitting reform. So on one hand, an online audience member would like to know more about what will be the impact if the permitting reform legislation, while it's been pulled from the continuing resolution, what will happen if it goes through in another way? Will there be offsets to gains in the Inflation Reduction Act? And then to build onto that, what siting and permitting reforms would you suggest are needed to balance the fast build out of renewable energy that will be needed to reduce emissions?
So we don't really have time to cover this, but we're going to need some kind of reform in transmission building. We cannot get the supply of renewables and clean energy from the source to the rest of the country without some sort of transmission reform. There are a lot of people that have written a lot of papers on this. Currently, transmission is not a national thing that FERC or anybody else owns. It's all regional. And we're not going to be able to succeed without that. The Manchin bill, though, had a lot of very negative things that had nothing to do with really helping clean energy move forward. So, WRI, we don't support things that would just fast track specific pipelines that one person likes with no environmental reviews, or undercutting the Clean Water Act, et cetera. But we do need to have a thoughtful conversation about how we can move this forward in a way that we can build the transmission and get the grid that we need in order to get all this clean energy online. That's very brief, but there's a lot of literature that you could read about this if you're interested.
All right, thanks so much, Christina. We're going to have time for about 2 more questions. So the next question we'll draw from is online. And this will be for whomever feels drawn to answer that. So how does this legislative shift impact American foreign policy? And this feels like a particularly pertinent question going into COP27, which is the big United Nations climate change conference that will be happening in a month in Egypt. So how does this shift impact American foreign policy?
Well, we're a player again. We had been sidelined for 4 years under President Trump, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, and not taking any significant action. So we've just not only rejoined the Paris climate accord, but we're actually taking concrete steps. The rap on the United States has been we're all talk and no action. Well, not now. We are talk and action. It gives us the moral leadership to go to Egypt and press China and India and Russia and some other countries who have not taken the steps necessary to keep global warming to that 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it gives us the moral authority, and along with Western Europe, they're taking some significant steps to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Although the Ukrainian war presents some real challenges to them, but they are committed to doing this along with the United States. We need to invest in developing countries to assist them and make sure that they can make this transition too. But it gives us the moral leadership to lead.
All right, thanks so much for that, Perry. Our next question is from our in-person audience. How can we take steps to developing a community that is less reliant on individual transportation? Is that too ambitious of a goal?
No, it's not. It's a great goal. I mean, in Charleston, we need more bike lanes, for example. We need more public transportation. It's a country, we need to invest in train transportation again. And if you go to Europe and you get these fast trains, and they're delightful. I mean, they're clean, they're efficient, they're fast, they're on time. You can just count on them. They're wonderful means of transportation. And we've not done that in the United States. So there are all kinds of things that we need to do in transportation, and we need to make our cities walkable and bikeable, and really take some fundamental steps. I mean, we need a sea change on how we do things. We can't continue the same old. I mean, this is a fundamental change of how we live our lives and what we do. We have put far too much greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. We need to change our behavior to be able to impact those emissions.
All right, as our last question, I think we have time for one last question, and it's pretty broad, but I think it would be good if each panelist would maybe have a line or two to respond to this one. So the question is, how do we integrate the conversation of climate change into more sectors of our life? So And just maybe a line or two, how do you think we can integrate climate change into more sectors of life? So whoever wants to go first, go ahead, Perry.
Well, I just said that we need to talk about climate change. We need to have a dialogue with our family, with our neighbors, with our colleagues. We need to gauge people and make sure that they understand the severity of the problem, and that there are some solutions out there, and that we need to make change to be able to implement those solutions.
I think the way we develop habits as individuals is the way we develop habits for our society and for our country, and that is by gaining and sharing knowledge, shaping attitudes, developing the skill set that we need. Then it becomes a way of life and a mindset. But without the foundational educational efforts and the shifting of mindsets, it's going to be a very challenging, but again, very rewarding time for leaders and leadership. So I think that's education and awareness is the key, and you do that by, as Perry said, by communicating and talking in all your circles.
Christina, a final thought from you on that question?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think I've said everything I had to say on that.
Okay. Well, I see that we've reached 8:30, which is, and we so appreciate, I mean, people's time is valuable. Every single minute of the lives of all the people who are here in this room are precious. Sometimes you forget that, but then sometimes you remember it. And that's true of all the folks who took an hour and a half to be online with us tonight. So thank you so much. Give yourselves a hand. Excellent. Let's give our speakers a hand too. Thank you, Morgan King from the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, Gary Zuckett from the West Virginia Citizen Action Group, our co-sponsor here. Nice to see you here. Thanks everybody for coming. As I said, we'll be posting this on YouTube you can study those slides to your heart's content. I don't know how precious your time is for that, but it is up there. Actually, we do have quite a few people who come on YouTube. A lot of these things get 50, 100 views over the successive months. So they have some enduring value. Special thanks to Christina DeConcini for traveling all the way from wherever it is you are. It's very beautiful out there. The sun's shining. Of course, that's probably just a picture.
It's a fake background. You too can get it on Zoom. But I'm just in my office here in Washington, D.C. I mean, my
You're at
home
your
office.
Well, it's a very nice
My,
office.
my home office. It doesn't look like this. I wish it did.
No, we're just tickled that you spent this evening with us. Thank you.
I was delighted to participate. So thank you for such a great program and such other excellent panelists.
All right. Thanks, Perry. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody in the audience. Good night, everybody. We're going to end the program, hopefully.